Hello! Welcome everybody. My name is Sherry Shish. I am the pattern designer behind Powered by Quilting. This is Wave Pool Block of the Month, month 5. So if you are just now joining, you should go back and watch months 1 through 4 and then come back and join us for month 5. And then this is kind of tips and tricks, and then if you would like to ask questions or things like that, go ahead and leave them in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as possible. If you are not doing this pattern yet and would like to get a PDF or paper version, there is Etsy links in the chat. And there are still, I think, a quilt kit or 2 as well. So if you want to make this exact quilt, go ahead and use those links. Now, we are going to get started. So month 5, I already got everything going and pre-cut. I'm actually going to pull up the pattern on my iPad because I have a PDF version of the pattern, and then we will get going. So I've already pre-cut, and I've actually already pre-sewn a few of the pieces, and I did that just so we can save some time today and talk about techniques and things to watch out for versus you watching me literally sew and trim a bajillion pieces. So for this month, we're going to be making 2 different types of blocks. You're going to be making one block that is going to be much larger, which I believe is 15 and a half squared. So there's 2 of those, and then you'll be making 4 of a 12 and a half inch square block. So you're going to make 6 blocks total, very similar to last month, but just different blocks in this case. So you're going to have some fabric A from fabric B, I think it's this one, fabric C, fabric G, H, and background. We are going to be making half square triangles today, modified hourglass blocks in 2 different ways, and then we'll be doing quite a bit of web piecing as well. So we're going to start with making some half square triangles. We are going to start with fabric B, which are these squares. So I have fabric B and background. You'll be making as many as the pattern tells you to do. So I typically like to make all of my half square triangle units all at once. So what you'll do is you'll put, fabric right side together, and you'll take either a ruler and a Frixton pen, or if you have clearly perfect angles on your machine, you will use that and you do not have to draw your line. So if you don't have this, the clearly perfect angles, you're going to want to draw your line from diagonal to diagonal on your piece and sew a 1/4 inch away. If you have clearly perfect angles, what you'll do, obviously this is where your needle is, you'll align to the B sections. So you'll have the very top left line on that B, your bottom point on this line as well, and you'll just sew that way, turn it around, and sew the other side. Okay, so we have one of those to make. Well, we have multiples. I'm just going to do demo for one, and then we're also going to do fabric H, which is this piece and this square. So we're going to do that as well. So we have multiple different kinds of half square triangles today that we're going to make. And then you're also going to do one with fabric A, which is this, and fabric G. And the reason why I'm going to do these all together because they're all typically half square triangles. However, if you notice, fabric A and fabric G, they're larger. These are going to be making our modified half square triangle or modified hourglass blocks, so you will not trim this set. You'll trim the others. So I'm going to go ahead and get those sewn. I have my machine already set up and just gonna get ready to sew some half square triangles. Be super helpful if I have the right stitch length. I'm going to have to go back and re-sew just the beginning of that square as I have my machine set up still from bag making and my stitch length was way too big. Alright, now give me 1 second. I'm going to re-stitch this part real quick, and then we'll go through and do the other side. So what happens if you sew with too big of a stitch length? Well, with quilting, your pieces kind of come apart, unfortunately, because there's not enough thread that holds your fabric pieces together. And then, of course, if you trim them, and you're cutting through some larger stitch length pieces to trim down these squares, you'll have seam separation because your stitch length is too long. So sometimes, if I'm doing something like strip piecing, I'll actually go and shrink my stitch length, because I know after I strip piece everything, I'm going to cut everything down. So if you actually go ahead and, what was I going to say? If you actually go ahead and shorten your stitch length, when you trim everything down, it's not going to be as easy for the seams to pop or change or pull out. Pop or pull out, I guess is the correct word. So I'm cutting these in half. Again, the large ones I'm just going to go ahead and iron, because we are going to make a modified hourglass block with these two. Okay, with these two prints. So this is fabric H, fabric B. We're going to go ahead and get these trimmed down to size first. So a couple ways you can trim this down. You can go ahead and press the seam open and use a block lock ruler or a normal square ruler and trim it up to size. Or you can use these Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers, and I do sell these on my website as well as Etsy. Make sure if you get them, you get the grippy on the back. What happens with grippy is if I push down, the ruler doesn't move. If I don't have grippy on the back, these are slick rulers. If I push down, like, the ruler will still move, which then makes cutting the dog ears, like these small little pieces out here, a little trickier because your blade comes right at your hand. It's actually really unnerving. I tried these rulers first before grippy was on the market, and I freaked out. I thought I was going to cut my hand, and I was like, couldn't use them anymore. And then when I saw grippy at Quilt Market in Portland, this was like May of 2018, I was like, oh my goodness, we need this product hardcore, like right now, for these types of rulers that are super slick. But it's so helpful on the back of these rulers. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these up real quick, and I'm going to just press all of these. It's pretty much super easy. You align on the line that you want. You trim the two sides. You trim your dog ears, and hey, guess what? You have the perfect half square triangle now when you press it open. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead real quick and press these open. Alright. So I've made a couple of these already, so I'm going to just put these here with the other ones that I've made. And then fabric B, I've made a whole bunch of these already, but we're going to put the two that we just made with the ones that have made it previous. Alright, so you should have a stack of fabric B half square triangles, fabric H half square triangles. I forgot. I need to press these. Now, for this set of modified half square triangles, we're going to use a background square with these fabric A and fabric G half square triangles. What we're going to do with this background square is we are going to put this on top of our current half square triangle. Now, if you notice, your half square triangle is going to be larger than your background square. So how the heck do I line this up correctly? Use the points. So you line up your point on left to right. So like the way I have this set up right now is a diamond with the seam allowance or seam line from left to right. I want point to point on that seam allowance. And then I do my best, literally to kind of just center that square. But as long as these points on the left and right side are on the edge, like the seam allowance line, you should be good. Then what you're going to do is you're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from these lines. So you might find it easier in this case to draw your line, regardless if you have the clearly perfect angles. So you can draw your line from corner to corner here, sew your 1/4 inch away on either side. But it doesn't really matter. I can shift this over on this side so it adjusts to the right hand side. As long as my point and my point here are aligned, I can sew a 1/4 inch off of the diagonal from the white square, the background square. So if I'm using this on my clearly perfect angles, you just want to make sure you're aligning on the white square with your little lines versus the outside square. All right, so I'm just going to recenter that to make it a little bit easier on myself, and then use another one as well. We're going to follow this the same way that we did our half square triangles. We're going to sew 1/4 inch on either side, so we end up with 2 modified half square triangles at the same time. Now, the reason why we do it this way, without trimming, is that we will trim after all of these are made. I do chain piece these one after another. And we'll sew the other side. So now we have these. I'm going to go ahead and cut on the diagonal. Okay? So very similar. One thing you'll notice is that the two that I made are going to be mirror images of each other, right? They are not identical. These half square triangles or modified hourglass blocks are not identical. You have an A and a B. All right? Same thing for this side. And what I do tell you to do on the instructions is these two, this half square triangle and these half square triangles, get pressed differently. So make sure you're looking at which one's fabric A, which one's fabric G when you're actually pressing your seams. Let me trim these up and then I'll remind you, because I gotta look at the pattern to know which one's which. And the reason why we do this is, let me back up. If you don't press your seams to one direction, you're pressing your seams open, it doesn't matter. Honestly, even if you're pressing your seams to one direction or one side, it doesn't matter. It really only matters if you care that you have potential clashing seams. The reason why I have these going in different directions is because I know in the final layout of the block that they go next to each other. And if I change the seam direction for these blocks specifically, it just comes for a nicer finish. I personally do not like to press seams open. I just don't like it. It's personal preference, right? You can fight it one way or another. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't, but on default, I typically like to press towards one side. And so I gave you guys kind of like a hint on saying, okay, so if you press towards one side, there's a couple areas where it would make sense for you to make sure that your seams go one way. All right. So when we're on page 14, these with fabric A on top, like this, will go towards the white. Will go towards the background. So these go towards the background. These go towards the print. So I'm going to iron my fabric. Oh, you know what? I was also supposed to tell you guys something. When you guys use the clearly perfect angles or the slotted trimmers for these, you have to use your center line to match your center line. So center line to your stitch line. That's how you center your trimming. I forgot to mention that today. The other thing is if you don't use those to trim, what you would do is actually press them open first like this, and then use your ruler and the diagonals on your ruler to make the correct trim location. Okay, so you have these two. I have a couple of these as well. I have a couple more that I already made. All right, like so. So those are extra blocks. I'm gonna go ahead and take these away. All right, so if you also notice, I asked you to do a different type of modified hourglass block. I'm asking you for a fabric A and fabric G. What I will do is lay them on top of each other, like so. And I'm going to use my ruler and cut diagonal to diagonal. Now, you're probably asking, why are we making these modified triangle or hourglass blocks like this versus the other one? What we're trying to do with these modified hourglass blocks is only make one type, right? So the other one we have mirrored images, A and B, right? This time we're gonna make only one type with a different color for the larger square. So in that case, in order to save fabric, right? If I made it the other way, I have like half of my blocks unusable. In order to save fabric, we have to first cut them apart into the quadrants and then sew them together. So I did one line, and then I'm going to do the other line. Okay. And I like stacking these two already right sides together because when I cut now, I can take these directly into the machine to sew. Now, here's the fun part. We are going to sew them with the flat side first. I usually do not like starting like going into my machine this way because of this like pointy edge. I don't like that getting sucked into the machine. I usually like going into the machine with the flat edge this way, okay? And so the fun part is if you have fabric G on top, we're gonna sew all four of them this way with fabric G on top going into the machine, okay? One thing you'll want to be careful is the straight edges that you are having that's going straight into the machine are all biased. So if you stretch or pull, it will pull or stretch on you. Like if you push or pull, I mean, it'll stretch on you. I'm going to do all four of these. So we have all four of them. I'm going to quickly cut them apart and then I'm going to press them open. I typically press to fabric A just because in my colorway, fabric A is green. The other one is kind of like this white blue. You can either press them, you can press them in either direction. It doesn't really matter. Okay. I have a couple extras from the last time I did them, so I'm going to pull those all aside. We don't need this many, honestly, but not for this block, but we're just going to essentially do half a demo. So in order to get our square that we need for the other side, right? So we made the modified hourglass blocks, we need the big square or the big triangle for this set of hourglass blocks. We're going to take fabric B and we are going to cut it apart on the diagonal, okay? So same thing, diagonal to diagonal, like so. And we are going to align this with what we made here. So we align the diagonal edges together, but in order to get it centered, this point that you see at the top of this triangle needs to be the same. It needs to hit this seam line at the same time. So the way you do it, so you're gonna go We're gonna align the seam allowance or this raw edge together. That point needs to align with that point up there, or where that seams come through, and we're gonna stitch along that hypotenuse, the diagonal of the triangle, the large diagonal of the triangle. Again, these are all bias seams or bias edges, so you want to make sure you don't push and pull too much. Or really at all, because if you push and pull at all on the bias edges, you will accidentally skew your pieces. Trim these before we finish. I'm going to put these aside. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys again because I forgot to on the other one. Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers. We are going to go ahead and align my center line with the stitch line that was perpendicular to the stitch line we just did. And then from there, we trim off the edges and the dog ears. And we are done. So this is how that gets trimmed. I'm going to show you how to trim it with a normal ruler because I feel like this is probably a little bit more difficult to do. So if you don't have a Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers, like what the heck do you do now? Right? Like, how do I make this modified hourglass block really easy? So, by the way, all of our hourglass blocks should look identical for this one that we're making. So like, in this case, that one looks identical, right? That one will look identical. That's why we did it this way, where we're cutting all the pieces, versus the other way where it gives you mirrored modified hourglass blocks. So say like I don't have a Clearly slotted trimmers. I'm going to go ahead and just press this one open. Alright, so you need a square ruler that's going to be bigger than your finished block. Alright, so square ruler. And you have these diagonal lines, and you know how big your piece is supposed to be. So where you want to do this is, okay, you can do this two ways. You can say, okay, I want my diagonal line hitting my diagonal for the small piece, and I know my sizing, that the sizing numbers need to also hit that hypotenuse. Or I theoretically can turn this around and do it this way. But this way is a little harder to do the hole on the diagonal, which we can. And then you want to make sure that the piece that has the other one finishes off where your correct sizing is going to be. So once you have that set, you're going to be able to cut two sides, like so. Rotate your piece and cut to the size that you desired, or per the pattern, or what size this is supposed to be. And get a nice square. So that is a different way to trim up your pieces versus the Clearly slotted trimmers. I find that a little bit more difficult because you have to do all four, and you're actually just aligning diagonals with diagonals on the ruler versus where your seam lines are. So now that we've done most of our units, pretend we have sewn all of these. Okay, so I have extra pieces because I did not sew all of my units yet, right? Like I still have more for the other set of blocks. I'm only doing one of each block today as a demo. So for month 5, block A, that block, we are using a lot of fabric B, half square triangles, fabric C squares, and fabric background squares. Okay. So I'm going to start laying this out. Theoretically, you can make this block in multiple ways. You can sew them into quadrants. You can sew it into 9 patches. You can sew it in multiple ways to make the same thing work, right? Like you can make this multiple ways. Typically, what I like to do, because these are all squares, I want to web piece the entire block, okay? And by web piecing the entire block, what that does is I can just lay out 100% of the block, take it to my machine, so columns 1 and 2 together, add column 3, add column 4, add column 5, then press all of my seams, so then I just have horizontal rows. and then sew the rows together. That is how I would personally do this block. That's how I'm going to show you how to do this block. And I do it that way because honestly, that way, if there was more blocks or pieces that had different things at different orientations, for me, it means that unless I laid it out incorrectly to begin with, I don't usually screw up my block placement. Okay? All right, so block A. We have a 5 by 5. I'm going to sew column 2 to column 1, add column 3, add column 4, add column 5. Then I'm going to sew rows 1 and 2, add 3, add 4, add 5. And that's how we're going to finish off this block. All right. So, when we do this, we do not want to cut thread in between each of the rows. So that's row 1's, column 1, column 2. This is going to be row 2, column 1, column 2. Row 3, column 1, column 2. Row 4. And then row 5. So how do you want to press your seams? When you are using a web piece block that's this big, I would actually pre-press my seams in a specific direction. I would pick either, are you going to do all left one row, all right the next, and then continue, or are you going to alternate by block or by unit? It's up to you. Just make sure as you're finger pressing your seams, you're consistent so that when you sew the rows together, your seams will nest. So I'm going to press all my seams to the left, then to the right, to the left, to the right, versus by block piece, because I feel like it makes a lot of sense if there were solid blocks every other, like if you had a checkerboard, but because this doesn't have quite that checkerboard feel, I'm just going to do the whole row to one direction. And you want to press your seams as you go. The reason why this is helpful is once you're done adding all of your columns, really when you go to the ironing board, you're just ironing the seams that you've already pressed with your finger, except for the last seam row, right? Like between column 4 and 5. And it will go much faster than trying to figure out how to get your iron in between all the different rows to get your seams pressed correctly. Now, with even smaller pieces, if you're web piecing with like a 1.5 inch square, even a 2.5 inch square, it is imperative you finger press. My iron is way too big and it does not like to go in there to get all of those little seams pressed. So, keep going. We're working on column 4. Easy to remember, right? Left, right, left, right, left, right. And then you start over, verify that you're going the same direction as you have been on the next column. Alright, so I'm going to start over, verify that I've been going to the right. Alright, we're going to keep adding our blocks, our units. So we are almost done. We got our last little block to sew on here, and then we're going to take to the iron so we can iron all of our rows. So here are our 5 rows. We're going to take this to the iron them flat. I actually will probably do some finger pressing here to show, to help myself really. Since this is the last row and we haven't actually finger pressed this one, I'm going to finger press them here, and I'm going to finger press them in the right direction that I was going the whole time. And then we're going to go to the iron, hit all of these seams with the iron, and they'll be done. So the fun part about finger pressing all of these, ironing all of these, is now when I go ahead and sew my block together, all of these seams will nest. And because they're all chain pieced together, they really can't go anywhere. So it's up to you. Are you a pinner? You can pin all of these pretty easy. Or are you a light pinner and you may decide you don't want to pin these because the blocks are not big enough for you to like lose your location. I think when the blocks are even smaller, pinning actually distorts the fabric enough where sometimes you will actually pin incorrectly and your block will shift. It's actually kind of funny. It's counterintuitive, honestly. The last row to iron. And then now we're going to take these rows that we've made and sew them together. So we're going to go ahead, fold them on top of each other like so. And we are going to stitch down. So you can either pin every single one of these or hold them. I actually like holding my seams, but for a newer quilter, I absolutely recommend pinning your seams. So I use clover fork pins, and I pin on either side of the seam allowance to make sure my seams do not move while we sew. I line up my seams. I stitch until I hit that seam, and then I make sure that the next set is done. So pretty much I'm holding, a couple inches of fabric together at a time versus the whole piece. All right. So now we have rows 1 and 2 together. We're going to flip this and sew row 3 to what we did. You can pin this again, take your pins out as you sew, or hold your seams. I like holding seams. It's what I do unless the piece gets too big. Once the piece gets too big to hold your seams, then I do end up pinning. do that again for the next row. And then once we finish that, we have one more row to do, and then we'll be done with this block. We'll have to go press it flat, and block A will be complete. We're going to press this block flat. So typically what I like to do is I like to set my seams, which means I'm going to iron on my seams before I press it open. It relaxes that fabric a little bit. And then I'm going to do that again. But the next one, press that open. I'm pressing all of my seams one direction just to give myself a little bit easier, you know, remembering about, hey, you know, this is going to have to meet up with other blocks that I'm making in the quilt. If I all go towards one direction, these blocks are rotatable, like by 90 degrees or so. And so if the seam allowances or something are pressed to the wrong direction, really easy for me to rotate the block to hopefully be in the correct direction. Oops. So here is block A. So month 5, block A, you will be making 2 of these beautiful blocks. And now we're going to actually make block B. So block B utilizes some really fun pieces, right? So I actually need to look at the pattern again, because I don't have this memorized. So block B, we are going to be using our really awesome pieces here. So what I want to look at is there are 4 of these in the block, okay? So with fabric G, if we make a flying geese with the white fabric, fabric G is up top. All right, so we have that in a pinwheel design. Okay. So you see how this is a pinwheel design with the large white flying geese. That means you have A in the middle. Then we have this one with fabric B, big squares. And this fabric B, big square, is going to come in and make kind of that square flying geese with part of the white. So that's kind of how you can make that work. The other thing that you can think about is you have fabric A's on the outside. And then with your fabric H, I think, yeah, H, half square triangles, these go on the corner in that same pinwheel fashion. All right, so very similar to what we did with block A, we're going to sew this the same way that we did block A. Meaning we're going to sew column 2 to column 1, sew column 3, and column 4. And then we're going to sew the rows together. But as you can see kind of here, we have where we alternated these blocks in the middle to press towards the white. You'll see where it matches the other modified modified hourglass blocks that the seams will nest. I said flying geese because I see the white flying geese, but they're hourglass blocks. I feel like quilting terms are sometimes a tongue twister, so it's really hard to like say the right word sometimes. So this block is smaller than block A. However, you will be making 4 of these blocks. These will be part of the top and bottom, like second border or first border for the middle. I guess it's the first border because the second border is actually all of month 6 blocks. So once we finish months 1 through 5, the center of the quilt is pretty much done. And what I mean by that is like the large center of the quilt. So you can actually stop here and make the quilt 72 by 72, I believe. Actually, I don't think that's true. I can't remember. Don't listen to me. I don't think that's true because I think the other blocks are bigger. I can't remember. I need to go look at the pattern. Most of the time I have a 6-inch border, but then I'm like, I don't think so. I think these blocks are actually bigger that I made for this one. And I'm confusing, the other block of the months that I've made. So. I will check that in 1 second. And again, I am finger pressing my seams as I'm going left, right, to make sure that I have good seams that will nest when I get to the iron. Again, I'm going to be doing that all in the same direction. So this time I went left first, so I'm going to go left again. So it's going to go left, right, left, right. You don't have to go left first. You can go right. You can go right, left, right, left. If you do choose to press your seams open, what you'll find out is when you want to press open your row seams, you will need to go through and snip the little chain piecing threads. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you are pressing your seams open, you'll notice that if you were chain piecing and wanting to spread that last seam, that the threads that are holding those rows together are going to block you from being able to do that. So you'll take a small pair of snips and just snip the little chain piecing threads there and press your seams open. No problem. And press these last seams in the directions that I had been doing. Like so. So it goes here. Alright, so I'm now going to go iron this block. Put the block A over here. Make it look a little prettier on the side. And while I remember to look it up, once you finish the center will be 66 by 72. Okay. Yeah. I was like, the borders are larger than that. I don't think that's right. All of my block of the month quilts finish at 72 by 84. And that's why I was like, oh, it's 72. And I'm like, that's not right. The borders are larger than 6 inches. So month 6 will be the top and bottom border. They're going to be reminiscent of month 2. And they're kind of fun. They are fun little blocks to make. So I'm really excited. We are almost done with block of the month. So first row together, we're going to go ahead and do that again with the center seam and then the last seam between rows 3 and 4. To being done. And again, we are going to be making 4 of these block B's for month 5. There are 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom of the first set of borders before you get to the month 6 blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and get this block pressed, but this is the second block that you'll be making in month 5, and that would be month 5 block B. So here is block B, and we are finished for month 5. You'll make 2 of block A, 4 of block B, and that is it for month 5. Thank you guys so much for sewing along with me. I'll see you guys next month for month 6, and that's the last block making month. We may be doing a full quilt top assembly 2 months from now. I haven't quite decided if we want to do that or if I just want to post about the finished quilt on my blog. But anyways, if you'd like to ask me any questions, feel free to leave comments. I do look at them and I will respond as soon as I can. Otherwise, if you have other questions, I am live on Twitch at twitch.tv/poweredbyquilting every Saturday. And that's probably the easiest way to get your questions answered in a live chat sort of way. Otherwise, I will see you guys next month for month 6. Have a great day.